Welcome again to our near-death experience interview series. I'm Robert Mays. Suzanne and I have researched near-death experiences for the past 15 years. We are interviewing people who have had an NDE and who have also received visions of future world events. These interviews are part of our research project that's exploring near-death experiencers' insights into the deeper meaning of the challenges currently facing humanity, such as the pandemic and the social and political polarization of society. What advice do NDErs have for coping with and responding to these challenges? We'll pause here to bring in today's guests.
We are here again with Rabbi Stephen Robbins of Congregation Neve Shalom in Los Angeles. He is also co-founder of the Academy for Jewish Religion California, the first trans-denominational rabbinic and cantorial school. Stephen is also a clinical psychologist with a specialty in the psychoneuroimmunology of trauma. He has had a total of 7 NDEs in his life. During each NDE, he received a prophetic vision, a message, or a mission. We will continue to explore these experiences in this session. Welcome, Rabbi Robbins. We're very happy to have you yet again.
And again, it's hard to even find the words to express the gratitude and the humility I feel in finally being able to voice this and the incredible, gentle and loving way in which the two of you have helped draw this out of me.
Thank you, Stephen. In our earlier interviews, we covered your first 6 NDEs. The first was at your birth in 1954. The second was in 1964 from hepatitis. The third was in 1987 from complications from influenza. The fourth was in 1991 from lung collapse. The fifth was in 2005, also from lung collapse. And your 6th NDE was in January 2018, and it was unusual. It was a spontaneous near-death experience where your heart flatlined for 2 hours and your breathing stopped, but you recovered completely immediately when you came back. So now, can you describe for us your 7th NDE? When and how did it occur?
This 7th NDE happened in May 7th of this year. So it's only a few months ago. And it is the most horrific and challenging of any of the prior 6, even putting them all together. I had an experience of collapsing on that day, which of all ironies was my 76th birthday. And I was taken to the emergency room at Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital. And of course, because of COVID, my wife was not permitted to go with me. And when they got me there, besides that I was comatose, they found pneumonia and blood clots in my left lung, blood clot in my left leg, what they called massive organ failure. And they were pretty sure that I must have had COVID-19 because of all of those symptoms. But every time they ran a test, it came out negative. So the question was, why was this happening? And the response is on multiple levels. But let me focus on the the experience of the NDE and what happened to me and what I learned. In each of the prior NDEs, I was lifted and supported through each of the 5 dimensions of transition to a place of great loving and healing. This time, my shomrim, my guides, and all of them who came to me were all cloaked in darkness, in black. I had never seen them this way. And instead of their visages shining with light, their visages were covered in anguish and grief and mourning, and those that were still in human form had tears flowing down their faces. And I was so astonished and then frightened by it, because what was I doing being received this way? And was there something that I had done or not done that led me to this place? And they lifted me again through the dimensions. And in each of those dimensions, I confronted the dark things that I had done and that had been done to me in ways that I saw how they were compounded beyond the limits of my being and the beings of those in this world that hurt me, and how it fed the chaos that's always waiting on the edge of the coherence of existence, as I described in my earlier NDEs. And finally, I came to that place of the great expansion of consciousness. And when I arrived there, it was not filled with the kind of open, loving brightness with dark places that needed to be healed. The brightness and the love was there, but the vastness of it was filled with great anguish, grief, and anger. And at first I thought that it was directed at me. And then I realized that it was being given to me as a message. And that the message was complex, but essentially I was being downloaded into with the grief, the pain, the rage, the absolute astonishment of the hundreds of thousands of people in this country who were sick and dying for no reason, who had come to the end of their lives because of the actions of one man and his supporting group, which had denied life to these people when it didn't have to happen. And they knew that. And I'm saying this not as a political statement. I'm telling you what they gave to me, what they said they were struggling with. And then I realized that there were other souls similar to mine that were also present and were receiving the same experience. And that those of us who were there were to somehow take what we were learning and receiving from them and bring it back into this world and find a way to voice it and to begin to heal it. And the best way I can describe it is to use the analogy of the Zoom grid. And in the beginning, there were, you know how there are pages and pages of Zoom presences. So were these thousands of pages of Zoom faces that were surrounding us, and they were all crying and weeping and wailing, and it was the word sound is not appropriate, but the experience of what we would call hearing, seeing, tasting, feeling, digesting, being saturated with it it shifted all of my molecular structure. I could feel myself being filled with it in every way possible. And then it shifted to one Zoom page at a time, and each page was filled with one person. And they were people who were in this world, who had not yet left, who were in the midst of this, and those who were at risk. The page of my wife's face, my children, and all of the people I knew, including the two of you. All of the people who were subject to other people's disregard because they didn't care about anybody else but themselves, who would walk around infecting others without even thinking about how they themselves were infected. And this anti-life, anti-health group that was spread throughout the body of American culture, who just wanted to deny that death was all around them and didn't care if anybody else died as long as they were healthy. That enormous denial of the value of living, which is so pervasive in contemporary culture, is really at the core of the quote evil, or the destructiveness that's done in the face of acquisition, possession, the search for fame, for position, for place. And for those who know that they'll never get it, they're joining in with a community, with a culture, with a cult of people who have all surrendered their identities. Remember, and part of the reason that I was drawn into this is because I spent 20 years working to educate people about cults, to understand what people called mind control, built on the Chinese and Russian principles of brainwashing, and how it shifts the brain, the mind, and the persona, so that you end up surrendering your identity to something that you think will guide you because you can't guide yourself. And what all of these souls were expressing was the astonishment of the number of people who, both the average and the exalted, who had surrendered their own individual thinking to follow into a cult-like movement which denied the reality around them. And that's what we are living with in this modern world. It's not simply the denial of the coronavirus and all that it's doing now. It is the denial of the collapse of the economy. It is the denial of climate change, the denial of the burning up of the Western coast, or of the drowning of the Southern coast. It is the denial of the melting of the glaciers and the dying of the fish and the filling up of the ocean with islands of plastic. It is the denial of the dying of species, beginning with elephants and all the way down to insects and the grasses, so that everything in this planet is dying. And all of that was, in a sense, downloaded into those of us who were there, downloaded into me. And it isn't that this isn't anything I have expressed and talked about or thought about, but I have never, ever been a vessel of such darkness. And then the experience of the souls of those who are doing this, because what we see in this twisted humanity is like what I saw in the souls of those who abused me when I was 12 years old sexually. And that there are these veils of darkness swirling around the spark of light, which is the divine presence in each of us. But these dark veils, these twisted elements of life touch that spark in order to get energy and strength back. But when they do it, it causes excruciating pain. And so they are angry, and they take the anger out on everything and everyone around it. And what happens eventually, as we see, as is happening now, that the more they're challenged, the more they begin to fall apart. The more light that we pour on it, the more it begins to lighten up, because it is the acknowledgement that the darkness has the power, when in fact the darkness itself relies on the light to sustain it. And in my tradition, light is only a vessel. It is a vessel of the source of God, if you want to call it that, of the Holy One, that is encased in a spark of light, and like in Einstein's theorem, that meets mass and changes it into healing energy. And we who have the experience of this healing energy, who have had NDEs and returned and are no longer not only afraid of death, but who understand that there really is no death. There is actually the relief and the healing from the struggles of being locked in the physical. This needs to be taught. It needs to be expressed in a way that will ease the anguish and the grief and the loss of the souls that are already there, feeling that somehow their tragedy will have a justification, because it will be part of the motivation that leads us to save everything in existence that God placed in our hands, that placed in the hands of Adam and their every human being thereafter. And only when we arrive together, not just in this country, but as IONS knows and has contacts all around the world, that this is happening everywhere. And it is time for this universal voice. And so the faces I saw that morphed from single to groups were from every language, every culture, every race, every socioeconomic status, that have been the victims of this intentional using of the world's population as the way of enriching a few and denying everything else that's happening. And so, as my wife put it, as I said before, she said, I feel like I'm holding my breath, waiting for this election to happen, waiting for humanity to wake up. And we've talked to everybody that we know, and they all say, I'm holding my breath, wondering what will we do, because America becomes the symbol of all of this for the rest of the world. And when I came back, and I was not gone for several hours, I was gone for a little over 10 days. And I didn't eat. I was simply gone. That's why I lost over 40 pounds. And I came back in with an absolute uncertainty of what to do with all of this. I didn't even know where to say it or how to say it that would make any sense until you two invited me to begin to unload each of the NDEs. And the sixth one was so powerful that the seventh, this one, which is still with me, I'm still trying to recover from it, and has left me with a condition close to having a broken back so that I can hardly stand and walk, is so immediately present for Ions to begin to speak out, not about politics, not about who's right and who's wrong, but about this fear of death that drives us all, and that to teach that we have no fear of death, because what we know is that there is no death. There's no heaven, there's no hell, and there is no afterlife. There is only the continuation of living, the process of unfolding, and what we begin in this world, we do in the worlds to come. That relief that can come to millions of people can then turn us away from living in fear to living in purpose, to finding in our own individual soul's capacity the way to add into the healing, not just of the coronavirus, but the healing of the world around us, so that we can all assure that what John Glenn called this, no, it wasn't John Glenn, it was the guy that landed on the moon, Anderson, I think his name is, said, it's Kennedy who said, we all inhabit this same small planet, right? We all have the same dreams for our children. And that's true. We all inhabit this same small speck of existence, and it is glorious in its being, and it is tragic the way we have, like the virus itself, ripped it to pieces. And so what Ions can do by beginning to offer publicly its incredible store of knowledge, of research, not just of people's experiences, which of course are the most important, but all of the scientific work underneath, right, is the only voice that exists that can authoritatively speak to it. And so here I am, delivering the message now of thousands, 100,000s of people who are sick and dying, who want to be heard, and the thousands of coronavirus NDErs, yeah, who have gone through the transit and returned, and who have no idea what happened to them. And for us, for Ions, to reach out to them, to offer a way to support them, to understand what happened to them in their NDEs and their return, and the damage in their bodies they will live with, but also the enormous wisdom and power that they bring back with them, so that they don't just live as victims, but they live as victors who have something to offer. And that voice from all of these coronavirus NDErs that can begin to speak out is going to have such a powerful effect on humanity that it can't even be calculated.
When you were in the hospital for those 10 days, were you in a comatose state, mind state? For how much of the time were you in and out of consciousness? And is, what state were you in when you had this vision? Was it a continual vision throughout the whole 10 days, or how would you describe?
I'm at a place now after the 6th NDE that it's, as Eva described it, it's like I have a foot in this world and a foot in that world, so that I'm always not going back and forth, but I'm always connected. And so what happens now there and what happens here is a constant connection back and forth. And I feel like this, I don't even know how to describe it, this microwave tower between the worlds, because of all of the NDEs I've had. And because now I finally have a voice and a way to express all that I've learned and the messages I've been given. And this that I'm giving you now is only one part of the message. There are other parts to it that lead me now to the next stage of my life, where I have to both finish putting down what I've learned in one way, which is what you've now provided, a book of videos, the book I'm writing with my two partners, the chapters that will be written by people who I've worked with in healing, who themselves have become healers, and to work in all kinds of different ways, so that each chapter of the book with a new learning will be tied to someone who brought it out of me as I was working with them. So this process of my unfolding is not just something I'm given to do. It is the process of working with others who are in need and who draw out of me and my guides and theirs these revelations in them that make it possible for them to step forward.
So
And
I'd like to, if I could,
go ahead.
ask a question here about the process. Okay, so we have this insight that there is no death, and that will alleviate the fear of dying, and that will then needs to change the feelings and the behavior of people who are holding on to material reality because they are afraid of what will happen to them when they die. Or
Yes.
when they die, it will be annihilation or whatever their fears are. And
Or else they'll go to hell.
right, right.
And they'll be eternally punished for being inadequate,
And so,
or that they will go into the void and simply disappear.
right. And so one needs to change when one is greedy or is selfish. one needs to change one's heart to be open and to be kind and to be serving rather than to be taking
Generous.
and,
Yeah.
and generous rather than to be taking and holding on to everything. So that's one transformation that needs to be made. Once one has lost the fear of death, then one can relax, one can breathe out, one can
One, right.
one,
And you can stop feeling, you can stop holding grudges against people for the things that they did to you, even the people who you live with and quote love, with whom you have hidden grudges, you and punishing for them, and they have no understanding of why, or the grudges we hold against things that people did to us years ago that are still there, not because they're still jabbing us in the back, but because we're holding on to it. It gives us the right to be victims, to hold grudges, to hold anger. And that is the block to what you talked about, to love, to kindness, to giving, to generosity. And once we learn to surrender being victims, holding grudges, and turn and receive the kindness and the love that we have been given all our lives, we can discover that part of ourselves. And the change of what we would call evil is not about what we do with those who sit on high. It is what each of us do to change the way we behave with others and the way we view our own lives.
and there's also the need, I mean, part of that picture is the need for forgiveness for
Correct.
those who have hurt us, but also forgiving ourselves for all of the things that we know that we've done that are wrong, and receive the forgiveness because basically in the spiritual realm we are forgiven.
The word forgiven comes from the word forego. It means to forego that which has happened. And forgiveness means that you forego what was done to you and what you've done. You give it away so that it no longer holds you. And this forgiveness is the pathway toward reconciliation so that you reestablish contact, some form of relationship with those people or with those souls. That you may not be close or loving, but you are no longer living with their presence as if they are continually hurting you. And you release them as you release yourself.
Right. And yes, so that it is a mutual, when one forgives oneself, one releases also those who have hurt us. And actually our compassion for those who have hurt us is really a balance for what has happened to us.
Exactly.
Compassion,
And the ultimate role of that is our relationship to God, to the creator, to the source, to what I call the Holy One, that four-letter name of God that appears in the Hebrew Bible, that infuses all of us with the spiritual skeleton, the shape and the form, is that we are always loved and that we are always forgiven, and that the divine presence of love is always within us. It is we individually, it is I who block it out. When I say, I am not here, here I am not, instead of here I am, I am here and here I am, which brings the identity and the presence together so that we become, each of us, a holy place, a sanctuary. And in that, each of us sees in the face of the other the presence of God shining through, and we see people in that way, and we see ourselves in that way rather than in the darkness that we project from ourselves onto others, and by which we are continually judging ourselves, so that the traumas that happened in the past that keep repeating are the way we hold on to being victims and holding grudges and not releasing ourselves, so that the trauma stops being part of our identity in the right brain and simply becomes a bad memory that's planted in the left brain. Um, you talk in your introduction about brain development and where these events happen. I won't do it here. We could do it another time. But there is a whole transformation of brain function that happens when you begin to do this. The whole structure of the brain heals and shifts, so that the perpetual grinding, the talking that goes on so that people can't hear themselves stops, and you live in silence in your mind, so that whatever happens, you see it without the past getting in the way of the present.
And when one sees, this idea that if there is no death, then we are eternal. Our beingness is eternal. And
Yeah.
that means that we have this spark of God in us, and so does everyone else. And we need to recognize the spark of God in everyone.
Yes. So no one is expendable.
Right. Everyone.
Every single human being is necessary. Some may come into this world and be young and leave, but that doesn't mean their soul is meaningless. It means that whatever service it has will happen farther along, because if a baby dies, it doesn't mean that it is destroyed. It simply means that its soul moves somewhere else. That's what was happening to me when I died in the womb. But it was, and they were taking me to where my soul would go next, that the doctor then took my soul and breathed it into me to bring it back into this world as a way of teaching me what my task in the world was about. So I'm doing it again. I'm taking the breath that was breathed into me, and I'm breathing into all of those who wish to receive the breath of life, not from me or from the doctor, but from the source that gives the breath in the first place.
I think that we are out of time now. And I think this has been a wonderful conversation, mostly your presentation. And so I think that we may need to do another session, and we'll
Yes,
talk about that.
I
But
would like to do more of a kind of a session to talk about how to enter your NDE in this way, so that you can find the deeper messages that are hidden in it.
oh, excellent, excellent. So then let's plan on having another session. And for now, I think we'll have to say that that's enough for now. But thank you very much,
Thank you.
Thank you. Again, blessings.
and blessings to you.